How are you? Good. Good to see you. You too.
Good evening. I'd like to call this November 4th, 2024 School Board Work Session to order. It is now 6:03 p.m. The school board would like to take this moment to respectfully acknowledge we are residing on the traditional land of the Dene people. Our mission is to provide an excellent, equitable education and a safe, supportive environment so all students will succeed and contribute to a diverse and changing society. Mrs. Richardson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Burgess,
Here.
Miss Carol Hubbard,
Here.
Mr. Doran,
Here.
Miss Dulian,
Here.
Miss Maple is excused, Mrs. Hardy,
Here.
Mrs. Burnett.
Here.
Thank you. The board has a quorum.
At this time, I'd like to turn the meeting over to administration.
All right, thank you, President Burnett. I think we'll open the floor with Principal Snow giving an overview of his application, and why don't we work section by section through it, and if board members have questions as we go throughout, then they can ask questions if that works for you. Okay.
So I have a slideshow.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. Once Jasmine gives me the thumbs up. All right. So I want ABC boardroom. And then I have like X6 ABC. Yeah. Mic's on. Good evening, everybody. My name is Josh Snow, and I'm the principal at Effie Kokrine, and I'm joined tonight by Tanya Garnett, who is our APC president and also a parent of a student at Effie Kokrine. And I'm joined by Methany Ontaguk, who's over here, who is also an APC member and a parent, and Micah Bador, who is our classified staff represented on the APC and a very, very essential tutor at Effie Kokrine. And then next to me is my colleague, Bennett Wong, who is a junior high teacher, as well as an APC member, and also is doing his admin internship. So it's been great to work with him. And I think we're going to be joined in a second by our elder APC rep, Eliza Winfrey, who will sit over there. She just texted me. So it's really a pleasure to be here. It's 10 years since we last did this. So I want to start by giving you a sense of our school today in November 2024. A number of you have been to Effie Kokrine, and actually to those of you who have not been there, I extend an invitation. We'd love to have you come visit. And I think we can only talk so much about the school, but you've really got to be there to feel it and see it. So an invitation to you all. So if you were to visit our school today, you would walk in and you would see junior high and high school students. You'd actually see some pretty conventional looking classes. You'd see students taking an Algebra 2 class or in a US history class. And if you turned and went down to the other end of the building, you'd see a self-contained 7th grade and a self-contained 8th grade. But then I think as you started to look around, you'd start to notice some things that would feel different to you. For example, you might see students, older high school students out in the hallway showing younger students the next step in the process of traditionally brain tanning the moose hide that they're working on currently. If you visited the 7th grade classroom, you'd see an elder who is in there every morning, a Gwich'in elder. We call her Sitsu, and she'd be working with the students. You might see students our ambassadors giving guests a tour of the building. We recently had the superintendent over there, and then even more recently, 2 professors from Japan, and I literally just handed them over to our 2 ambassadors, and they spent the next 2 hours with them. If it was in preparation for one of our big school events, you would see lots and lots of students very, very busy, for example, cooking and preparing for Howard Luke's birthday potlatch, which just took place in the beginning of October. But one thing I'm confident of is you would see a lot of activity, and you'd see a lot of happy, confident kids who looked like they were really felt good about where they were. Our school today is 140 7th through 12th graders. We are approximately 80% Alaska Native students, with the majority being from the interior and the remainder coming from all different reaches of the state. The final 20% is just a total mix of racial backgrounds. We are 2 junior high teachers, 5 high school teachers, 1 administrator, an office manager, and a handful of really essential support staff. We're small, we're lean, but we're very, very committed, and we love what we do. So I welcome you to come visit us. I'm gonna pass it, actually, I'm gonna keep going. And I wanna just give you a little bit of history before we jump into the charter. And I've actually had the privilege of being there since the school opened 20 years ago. And I was originally a classroom English teacher before becoming an administrator. Effie was conceived and founded to address a very real problem in Fairbanks, the extreme high dropout rate of Alaska Native students. The original charter application was actually submitted jointly with Fairbanks Native Association, and we continue to work very closely with that organization. A group of Alaska Native leaders as well as parents came together to design a school that might address this issue, utilizing Native ways of knowing as a core focus. And actually, these books that I passed out to you were published by the Alaska Native Knowledge Network with the guidance of Ray Barnhart, working with these different groups of elders from all over the state. And these really have been core to our work since the very beginning. So it's important that you see these. I'm going to have Bennett talk about our foundational goals.
So in 2023, Effie undertook a year-long strategic planning process. One of the things that were created through the process are our guiding beliefs. Foundational goals make sure that a school's vision isn't just a statement, but a lived experience for everyone involved. They hold our school accountable to its purpose and ensures that all strategies align with core values and aspirations. So there are culture, we focused on culture, and Indigenous history and cultural practices are tied into curriculum to allow students to gain knowledge about their family and culture. Values, the Alaska Native cultural values guides everything that we do. Learning, staff personalize learning for each student based on their life circumstances and academic interests. Relationships, staff have strong relationships with students and families. Self-sufficiency, students leave our school with the tools needed to be self-sufficient, independent, and to pursue their goals. When these elements are woven together, they create a holistic educational experience that respects, celebrates, and uplifts the identities and aspirations of our students. The next slide should go over our cultural values. And our cultural values are drawn from a set of values adopted by Alaska Native elders from across the state, and they serve as core values by which students and staff at Effie engage with one another. These values are not just principles, they are an inheritance that shapes the worldview, character, and actions of individuals within our communities. By embedding Alaska Native cultural values in education, Effie honors these values, supports cultural resilience, and equips students to navigate society successfully.
So there is a section that asks for us to identify changes from the previous charter, which was submitted 10 years ago. And it's actually a fairly short list. One of the changes was to shift the administrative leadership of the school from a head teacher to a principal position. And I can explain more of our logic behind that. The APC was very much supportive of doing that. You could ask about that during the question answer session. The other was a change, the last charter application, charter renewal application, we were called the Effie Kokrine Early College Charter School. And we actually changed the name back, and there's a story behind that as well, which I can go into if you want to ask about that. But actually, I believe that one of the biggest changes is it's even hard to capture in the pages of the renewal application, and that is that the school culture, I believe, is stronger than it's ever been, and I've been there every year. And I feel like the staff in particular has a much stronger sense of who we are and what we're trying to accomplish with this endeavor. And now we can start giving them pages.
Oh, yeah. So if you look at, so on the charter application on page 7, we outline our academic policy committee. So recently we attended the Association of Alaska School Board meeting, and it highlighted the essential role of the APC in charter schools, especially as a vital representation of diverse voices. Our APC structure comprising 9 seats with representatives from the Fairbanks Native Association, UAF, an elder, 3 parents, and 3 staff members. We're also looking into adding on a student representative to the APC. And this ensures a balanced perspective that respects both community and educational experiences. Uniquely, our charter school is the only one in Fairbanks, we believe, with a minority of staff members on the APC, allowing for a more robust community engagement and empowering parents and community voices in guiding our school's mission, policy, and curriculum.
So really the heart of the charter renewal application starts on page 14, and that is the program structure. And then there's also additional items connected to that in the appendices. So Effie Kokrine is a separate junior high and high school, so 2 separate programs. Both of our programs, and this may come as some surprise to people, utilize school district curriculum standards, but we frame them using these booklets, using the Alaska Standards for Culturally Responsive Schools. And I think that's what really sets apart the way we deliver our curriculum. Both programs utilize small class sizes to allow teachers to personalize instruction based on the needs of students. We've capped our junior high at no more than 20 students per class and the high school at no more than 25. In the high school, we utilize a grade level advisory structure, which is really critical to how we deliver a lot of the things that a school counselor normally would do at a neighborhood high school in the district in terms of working with families on a student's graduation progress, working with them on their post-secondary, there we go. Working with them on their post-secondary goals and paths, and we actually allot time in a different way than the conventional high schools in Fairbanks for that advisory program. We have not gone away from prioritizing introducing students to college level coursework, even though we changed the name. And we do it differently now, and I would say this is a key part of the high school program, is our collaboration with Tanana Chiefs Conference and their TCC Go program. And so we work with TCC and the School of Management up at UAF, and we start introducing juniors and seniors to college level coursework. And one of the things I'm most proud of this program is what sets it apart from other early college programs, which is we specifically target the students generally you would not think of having enter those programs. So we actually have worked very intentionally with the School of Management, and we continue to have this priority to say, let's not go for the students who are earning the best scores and have the best GPAs in 11th and 12th grade. We're gonna basically take a risk on the students that we pull into this program. And we've gotten some pretty remarkable outcomes from taking that approach. And then finally, the other part of our program, which I'm really, really proud of, is our native language, basically our native language classes that are available. And we work with Doyon Foundation and then the Alaska Native Language Center up at UAF to make that happen. And it's very challenging because unlike being in a specific village, we represent multiple Alaska Native languages. And so you have to be really creative about how you're going to offer that opportunity. And you are up next.
So on page 17, it outlines our SPED services. So currently, there's one SPED teacher at Effie Kokrine servicing approximately 44 students out of 140. That's around 30%. So in junior high, 13 students, and in high school, there's 31. We follow the district policy and state and federal laws, ensuring that students receive complete services as outlined in their IEPs, their individualized education programs, 504 plans, as well as ELL or English language learners. There's daily on-site support. So students receive daily assistance from our special education teacher, along with additional resources and staff support. Accommodations for special education students include curriculum materials at appropriate reading and math levels, extended time on assessments, and small group testing environments, helping students participate effectively. And which is something really special to Effie Kokrine, having the smaller class sizes where teachers are able to work intimately with their students. SPED numbers are increasing. We may have the highest percentage of any charter school, approximately 30% on IEPs, and this poses a myriad of challenges. So continued support will continue our effort to further empower and celebrate our students.
So moving forward on page 17 of the charter renewal application, it asks for written objectives for program achievement. And so I'm going to just go ahead and read through the 6 written objectives. I want to double check my counting here. 7 written objectives. So we have an objective on attendance, cultural activities, literacy, elders in the school, small classes, native language instruction, and graduation success. And I invite you to open up your charter renewal application and just take a moment to look through these in detail. I don't need to read them all to you. So moving forward, the next section is on page 19 of the charter renewal application. And this is measures of student performance. And I think I want to start by just saying that we intentionally choose to measure student performance using a wide range of methods. And so I want to highlight a couple of these. Actually, before I do that, I want to say, and with these different methods, I feel like the big area of focus for us is growth. That as we look at measuring student performance, we get very, very focused on growth. So we include standardized tests, and we administer MAP and AK stars. We also actually were the first ones in the district. Now the district has adopted this across high schools to use the Lexia literacy online platform. And that allows us to really kind of have a running sense of students' reading levels and their performance gains in reading. We are in our second year of benchmark reading testing every student in the fall time, and we've actually evolved the benchmarking system that we're using based on the experience. But I would say we also look at other important measures, things like attendance, engagement in cultural activities, mentoring younger students, generally their sense of membership in the school community. And I was actually, Tim, I'm thinking of the last time you visited, and we were talking about measuring student performance, and you were kind of like pushing me to explain more. And I said, you know, one of the biggest measures for me is we stay in very close contact with our graduates. It's one of the really neat things about Effie Kokrine. And one of my measures is, what are they doing? Like, what are they doing after high school? That's a really, really significant measure, and it's hard to, you know, put down on paper. But I feel like, with that being said, when you look at our test scores, I'm going to be honest, they are not where we want them to be. Right? When you look at them in the appendices, you're going to see a breakdown of different categories of students. And we feel that this is very, very much something that we are focused on addressing. I mean, not a day goes by that the staff is not thinking and problem solving the learning gaps that we see our students facing. And we're continuously testing and implementing new methods. But I also don't want to get dragged down by those scores, because there's so many other ways that our students are thriving and showing that they can graduate and be successful in the world. And I think those are really, really important measures as well. So moving on, I think it's important to share with you what we see as some of the ongoing challenges for us as a charter school. And I think first and foremost with those are correcting these academic gaps that exist in our students. And I think the very nature of the charter says we are here and we invite families of students who have not been successful in conventional schools to come to our school. So just by that alone, we're going to face significant academic gaps. But it's very challenging. It's very, very challenging. I would say the second significant challenge that we are constantly talking about is chronic absenteeism. And this really spiked after COVID from my perspective, and also runs in parallel with us losing transportation, losing the school bus service. And I don't think that, you know, I don't think our chronic absenteeism would completely reverse if we suddenly had full bus service back, but the two are very definitely linked. And then the final challenge that I think a lot about as an administrator is the small staff that we have. And the demands on all of the members of the staff and how many different quote hats everybody is forced to wear. And I think one of the things to bring to your attention, we are the only charter high school in the school district right now. And there's a whole associated set of considerations by being a high school around graduation progress and credits. And then you have things like high school sports and eligibility, and all these kinds of things are additional responsibilities that we take on by being a high school.
So the future of Effie Kokrine is we're looking to expand cultural immersion programs. We'd like to continue researching, implementing, and increasing student engagement in Alaska Native heritage activities. And we believe that this is this could be a fundamental way to work on our attendance issue as a solution, to build and enrich our native language program, inviting language holders from across Alaska to participate in our school, enhancing academic support and achievement, where we strengthen literacy and math proficiency with targeted interventions and personalized learning plans, strengthening community and family engagement. We boost family involvement through events, partnerships, and elder mentorship. Addressing, a big one is definitely addressing transportation and accessibility. So we'd like to continue focusing and exploring our solutions to improve reliable access for all students to our school, to and from. Investing in staff development, focusing on culturally responsive teaching and staff retention strategies. We believe that these elements lay the groundwork for a more inclusive, supportive, and academically enriching experience for our students and community. We also believe in continual growth at Effie Kokrine so that we can honor Alaska Native heritage and foster a deep, lasting appreciation of this rich cultural legacy amongst all our students.
And Luke brought up another possible thing down down the road, which I just have to throw out there, would be at some point potentially having a boarding school element of Effie Kokrine. But we are open to questions now. Hey, Travis.
Hey, nice location. Didn't put it on the invites. Yeah, it's at Effie Kokrine. Yeah, been here on time.
Ms. Garrett?
I just wanted to add, so my name is Tanya Garnett. I'm originally from Arctic Village. I have a son in Effie, and he's in the 10th grade, and he's been there through junior high, and he loves it there. We don't really say like just our students, and we say Effie families because they pretty much serve their entire family. And I work with a lot of families that are in need, some that are going through some troubles and such. And because I work for the Arctic Village Tribal Courts, but I work from here. And we bring us a lot of students there, and they find a place there that they feel at home. You know, I grew up in Fairbanks as well. We moved from Arctic Village when I was 10 years old, and coming from a small village straight to, you know, there was more kids in my elementary than there are in my village. You know, it was coming, and you know, it's 150 now. Maybe it was about 120 then, people in Arctic Village. But I had a hard time adjusting. But I went through the schools. I went through Nordale, Tanana Junior High, and then Lathrop. And I didn't really have a positive school experience. I just couldn't wait. I could not wait until the day I graduated. And right after I graduated, I left and went home to Arctic Village for a gap year. You know, as a young person, we're hungry for our culture, we're hungry for our home. And the only reason I actually made it through was my mom didn't give me a choice. She said, you're going to school and you're graduating. But I really wish I did have more of a positive school experience where I had culture. I did, so I didn't really prepare anything to say, but I just want to express to you guys that Effie is, it's really a community. There's a lot of students there that really don't fit in anywhere else, and they find a place there, and they do individualized learning programs for them, like my son, he's also autistic, and he's an artist, and so like they make plans on in his learning, geared towards what he wants to do in the future, so that they're prepared. And then also there's a lot of partnerships. Josh and the teachers, they really try to utilize as much as in the community as they can. They partnered with Fairbanks Native Association, Tanana Chiefs Conference, and there was another one I was thinking of. What was it? Tanana Chiefs Conference, Fairbanks Native Association, Doyon Foundation for the language programs, and they do a lot in the community as well. They serve at potlatches. They help do a lot of the cultural things. Effie in the Native community in Fairbanks, they're really looked up to, and they're really respected because they really teach our kids. They really meet our kids at their level, and it's. I just wanted to share that with you guys, and thank you.
Ms. Julian?
Thank you. Is now a good time for some questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for the presentation. I just want to share that my brother-in-law attended Effie and my nephew as well.
Oh, wow.
So I am familiar with your work, and it makes a difference. Thank you for addressing that. One of the reasons that Effie was established was to address the graduation rates for Alaska Native students in the district. I'm looking at page 121, and am I reading this correctly that it's a 58.06 graduation rate for Effie?
So, yeah, so like everything, there's a story to this. So, during COVID, our graduation rate dropped precipitously. And so that year, for that cohort of students, that's what the graduation rate was. And so we actually qualified to become a comprehensive intervention school, or I'm going to get the acronym wrong. Our graduation rate has since, it's up in the 80s now. And so, so that was an anomaly, but I would still say that we're not satisfied with where it's at right now.
Thank you. And I have a follow-up. Do you have data on how that's improved? I can imagine there's improvements, but you've talked a lot about growth, and I appreciate that mindset. Do you have data on how you've addressed that graduation gap for Alaska Native students kind of since the inception of Effie?
So I think the answer to that question, or the place I would start, would be that everything is built on relationships. So I had the privilege of being introduced to the Alaska Native community when I taught out in rural Alaska. And like, this was when I was young. And I think it became clear to me from those first 5 years that I spent out there, and really the foundation of the school is relationships. And that I would say the single biggest driver of us working with families and supporting students who would otherwise be at risk of not graduating in 4 years or even dropping out is building on those relationships. And Travis, you want to add something there?
I'm sorry I'm late. My name is Travis Cole, And I graduated from Howard Luke Alternative when it was an alternative. And the standards that we had as an alternative school is a lot different from what I see now at Effie. You know, I'm really proud to see how they've evolved into adding, college credit courses. We didn't have that back in my time. You know, there's a lot of things that they've improved. And one thing I'd like to add to what, the numbers when you see the graduation rates, a lot of those kids, if they didn't have Effie, they would have had to gone to like Lathrop High School or else West Valley or Hutch or something, and I could imagine they probably wouldn't even have graduated if they went there, because as a young Native person that grew up in the village, like Tanya was saying, I had a major culture shock when I moved here to Fairbanks and went to junior high. And when I went to Lathrop, I was failing and I was missing a lot of school. It was terrible for me to wake up in the morning and want to not go to school. But then when I started going to Howard Luke, if I missed a bus, I would walk the 3.5 miles it took to get there, just because I love going to school. But then, the young man you saw hand me my phone, that's my son, Clifford, and he goes to Effie right now. And he was going to Ryan Junior High the year before he went to Effie. There he was failing everything. And he wouldn't talk to me about what was going on, but I kind of had a feeling like he just didn't feel like he belonged or something, or maybe he was being picked on or something. It was such a big school. And, my sweet son was just getting lost in the system there. But when he went to Effie the very next year, he actually got on the honor roll. And he wake up every day wanting to go to school. Even now, no matter what the temperature is, whatever it is, he has to catch a city bus to go to school, and he does it every day. He's so happy to be there, and his grades are doing good. His attitude just before that at Ryan, like I said, he'd be kind of in himself. Like I asked him how his school was, and he wouldn't really tell me. And I'm asking him, is there something wrong at school, and he wouldn't tell me. And so I think that more smaller school, one-on-one. Clifford participates in everything that he can in NYO and helpers, whatever that, natural helpers and leadership, and he partakes in all of that, and he's learning so much, and he's becoming more and more a good big brother to his little brother here, Harvey, because the things that he learns at Effie really blends into our daily life at home. So I could see his development at being at Effie is what's helping him get to a point that he is going to graduate, and probably do a lot better. If he was at Ryan, he probably would have failed by now, or got into something else or whatever. But the things that they do at Effie is so unique to our culture, and having so many natives there, we're just, I'm a culture bearer, and it's hard to explain sometimes how different it is in social circles and in society, how we act and react and feel like we fit in. He's learning how to make speech already. But if you have any questions about that, I could elaborate all day about, I think that when you look at the numbers, I know everything's got to be some kind of measurable thing, but then just that positive thing it has on our spirit, we're very spiritual people, and the unique way that they blend, the moose hide, that project right there really builds teamwork and gets them connected to themselves. I've been on the board of FNA for 10 years, 11 years now, and I've been in part of A&E, Effie Kokrine, Head Start, policy councils, and learned a lot about different ways we got to try to improve education for our children. And one thing that always improves graduation rates, test scores, everything is when a young Native person gets to know their own identity as a Native person. They have a much better chance of graduating with a good grade. Thank you.
Mrs. Hardy?
I'm just going to add two things to that. Just so one of the things we've started doing, I think Travis said it really well. So this advisory structure allows us to really track students over their 4 years of high school and start intervening as quick as possible when if they do start failing classes and getting behind. And so that's been a key part of this. And then also originally during COVID, but we've continued it to this day. We do a credit recovery summer program for the first 2 weeks in June. And again, so it's like at every opportunity we have, we're trying to reinforce and support and go in and fix things before they get too big. And you know, the other thing we do, and actually the school district is really trying to focus on this in general, is we focus a lot on our freshmen and them earning what we call it our freshman 5. You know, we try to at least have them leave their 9th grade year with 5 credits total, just because the evidence is so clear in terms of graduation success if you can have 5 or more credits. So we're thinking about all of those different elements of that.
Mrs. Hardy?
Yeah, I'll just add, if you look at the district's data dashboard, it tells a very clear story. So if you look at Effie's graduation rates and specifically filter out Alaska Native students, other than COVID, which everyone took a dip, they have been increasing their graduation rates every single year. And even if you look at last year, where they're at 83.3% of their students have graduated, versus Lathrop, and this is only Alaska Native students, at 52.6. And the sample sizes are comparable. It's not bigger numbers at Lathrop than there are at Effie. They are meeting their mission of improving graduation rates. And you can look, I looked at BEST, I looked across the board, other than ones where the size is 1 student, so they have 100% graduation rate. They, by and large, are able to have Alaska Native students graduate at higher rates than anywhere else in our district.
Any other questions from the board? Mr. Dorn?
Thank you, and thank you for being here and the comments and introduction. A couple of things that I've got you probably have in mind. There are edits as I look through the application piece. On page 7, it talks about the APC, but it indicates it's 7 members, and then there are 9 listed, and you mentioned maybe adding a student. I'm just suggesting getting the numbers correct and with some flexibility so that you don't necessarily have to come back to change that. Okay. On page 10, and you had it on in your slideshow, principal versus head teacher. It would be good to know, I guess, a little bit that change, why that change from head teacher to principal, and the possibility of, is that going to be a permanent part of the charter, or should the application show the versatility of perhaps having a principal or a head teacher?
You want me to answer? That's a great question.
Yeah, because it could be that
Yeah,
you
totally.
you want to make sure that you have a principal, and my own background,
Yeah.
I understand why that would be. But I'm just thinking in terms of not having to come back
Totally.
5 years from now or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, so that'll be something I think the APC can weigh in on at our next meeting.
And maybe just a two-sentence thing of why switch from.
Right now?
Yep.
So I gotta rewind. So essentially, it, charter schools have there was a unique model for charter schools in Fairbanks, which was when you had the head teacher model. When I was a head teacher, I did not have my type B endorsement. And essentially, I was a teacher evaluating teachers, which was troublesome. And the way that the district navigated that was to have my supervisor sign off on all those evaluations. And so that was one of the issues, but I think as we were looking forward, and you know, I'm not going to do this forever, and the APC is going to be looking for the best candidate possible to take over in the administrative position at Effie, and we felt like it was placing limitations on the amount of choice that the APC would have in looking. They couldn't cast as wide a net if you were limited to a head teacher, because the reality of the situation is you're a principal, you're doing everything a principal does, if not more, because it's a small charter school, and unless you're completely invested in that place, you're going to probably have a fairly difficult time attracting candidates to get paid less to do more. I mean, really, that was one of the considerations we discussed.
Dr. Minor?
I think the move to principal too is consistent with kind of the philosophical direction the administration would like to go in terms of leadership at charter schools, and specifically at a middle high school. There's a number of things that Josh has already talked about that's different about being in charge at a middle and high school, but having to know those eligibility rules, having to know credits that impact graduation, having to do discipline on a regular basis, having to work with Title IX issues. There's all these complexities at a middle high school that a head teacher isn't trained to deal with or work through. And we were very fortunate to have Mr. Snow that had tremendous skills to work through that. But in the future, we're not always seeing that with head teachers that are coming up into leadership positions and requiring that type B and that principal endorsement. We know that there's at least a minimum level of training that individuals have so they could step into this role if they needed to and really guide that school in an effective way.
Follow-up.
Good. Mr. Dorn?
Just to make sure that I'm clear, I'm not advocating for a head teacher, but I think the rationale that you're giving, and having done those things myself, I just wanted to make sure that within the application, if you want to keep it to principal, that's because that really suits Effie best. But if you needed versatility, then putting it at this point would be earlier rather than later. And then just put me back in the queue.
Any other board members? Mrs. Hardy?
I just have a few in the spirit of helping to make sure your application is done and you don't have to come back to it. And they're mostly just edit things. I noticed when I was reading through it, like it starts at page 8, the chart, and I think you're supposed to put page numbers for each of those things in the first column. The second column's for your evaluator. That makes sense. I can also show it to you after the meeting. It was just things as I was going through and reading it. I was like, oh, that's missing.
Okay.
Yeah, I can follow.
And then I have others, or I can go.
Go ahead, Mrs. Hardy.
Another one was on page 17. It currently reads, it's the special education. Let me go back to where it is on here. You have it listed, it's the first paragraph. All students with disabilities whose least restrictive environment has been determined by the Fairbanks North Scarborough School District to include Effie Cochrane's educational settings. And I sped person. The school district doesn't determine somebody's LRE. It is the student's IEP team.
Okay.
And so I would change it to the student's IEP team has determined, because that's federal law. And I've got like 2 others, or I can wait.
Continue.
Okay. You have the student teacher ratio, and this one's in our charter application you have at the end, and it says it's 20-1, but that's like your junior high one.
Yep.
And so you'll want to list your high school one as 25-1.
Which page you on?
It's in the charter at the very end towards your documents. Let me go, because I didn't write the page number this time. The application to our district, you have it written in there. I forget exactly what page it's on.
Okay. But we give the 20 to 1.
You say, and not 25
not
to 1.
25. Okay.
Yep. And then your APC minutes are up to April 26, 2023, but nothing after that. And I'm assuming you've met in the last year.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Going to move over to
good.
Mr. Dorn. Mr. Dorn?
Thank you. Pages 17, 18, a lot of places it says you will provide, and my question there is, a number of the bullets seem to be specialized funding, and those may just be examples of what's going on, but I do have a question about, is the intent, or does that bog you down in saying you're going to provide these things, the implication, but it may be subject to funding?
So
Especially under cultural activities,
yeah,
but
I think
but
my
elders
intent
and
was
stuff.
to show the extent to which we were working to achieve those program goals. And so maybe I'll consult with Lori and Luke's crew on, what's the best way to frame that, whether we leave some of that specific stuff out. Because honestly, I don't know the answer. I mean, I would say you're correct. A number of those things are based on funding that's currently happening. But on the other hand, I would say that when that funding ends, we're trying to illustrate that we will then go try to identify new sources to achieve those same things. So,
And it may be as simple as some, examples of efforts to date or something like that, as an example of what you want to try and do. But there are a couple that are that way. I don't want you to get bogged down with having to do this and somebody saying at some point, oh, you're not. Okay. And then my next one is on page 19. The reference is to peaks, and I believe they are AK star.
yeah, thank
And-
you.
And your chart later on are AK stars reference, so that's okay, but it's.
There
but
was something called peaks back in the day.
That's right, that's right. So, and others before that. So but just, and question I had that is between the 22-23, 23-24, significant drop in the language arts. Thoughts on?
Yeah, I
Yep.
mean, we literally, we looked at this very question, and you can track it by the presence of, I think it's 2 students. I mean, we literally we can say, because you're dealing with such a small cohort, that when we knew the learning gaps that existed for these 2 students, you can just follow them through as they influence the numbers.
Okay.
Mr. Dorn, I'm going to put you back in the queue real quick. Mrs. Julian?
Yeah, thank you so much. Looking at that same section, point number 7, so under graduation success, I'd ask you to add a little bit more about what those specific metrics are. You talk about a 2% goal increase, which is good because it's talking about growth. And then you talk about the 6.9% increase, and this is under page 18. in 2023 to 2024. However, when you look at the appendices on page 121, it showcases your graduation rates during the COVID year. So you definitely want to address that
Okay.
because it causes a lot of questions, which is why I asked that. And of course, as Ms. Hardy talked about, you can look at the district dashboard, but it's not here explicit.
Okay. No, point well taken.
Any other questions from the board? Mrs. Hardy?
My last one was on page 24. Let me go back to where it was. It says, students who are not accepted include those who require services not currently offered by the school. And I wasn't sure exactly what that might be or look like.
So it's one of the dilemmas actually, which is that all different kinds of families are attracted to Effie because of the model. So an example of a student like that would be, and generally at their previous school, they received primarily services in a very much self-contained classroom with a one-on-one aide, and that was based on the requirements of their IEP. What we do, because we don't take this stuff lightly, we don't just kind of, offhandedly make these calls. I work very closely with our SPED district coordinator, as well as our teacher on site. And honestly, I can tell you right now, we have students at Effie who generally, basically the site coordinator, when I was working with him, he said, based on their IEP, Effie is not the least restrictive environment, but based on these other considerations for what the family's looking for and how the student is able to integrate themselves into your school, it's working. So we're going to leave it. So it really ends up operating on a case-by-case basis. Always, with this primary question, what's going to be best for this kid? I mean, I feel like we always try to really come at it that way. Not what's easiest for us or, what's going to be best for the kid.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to commend Effie on the way that you do handle your special education and really looking at each individual student and their needs. And it shows in the fact that you have such a robust special education service and population and an amazing teacher that works there as well. I would it sounds, that line doesn't capture what it is you're actually doing. It sounds more like you're excluding, which is not generally the case. So might try to find a way that captures what you actually do a little bit better.
Mr. Dorn, did you have another question?
Thank you. I'm not finding the line is right offhand, but when you talk about literacy increase as one of your goals, it's to increase 2%, but it's just 2%. Suggestion. Right. If it, well, which is a reason of, yes. Okay. That's my point. It's not just 2%, but 2% every year.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think you need that phrasing in there. Otherwise, it looks like it's just go up 2%. And so, okay. The other one is in the professional development plans. What you have planned by the time this comes to us, what professional development you've done for the 24-25 year and have planned, that would be worth, I think, bringing it up to date.
Yep, I can do that.
Any other questions from the board? Mr. Dorn?
Okay. In the Appendix B, it's the contract with the district. Just my thought on that, and again, is timing when this comes to us to come to and then to go to the state school board. If there are any major changes expected for the 25-26 year, it might be worth having an update on that contract.
Yeah, I don't think we'll have those available prior to this going to the state board because I believe it goes to the state board in December. Is that correct? So,
It goes to deed in December and then to the state board in March.
They're
Yeah.
gonna look at it, but we can't change it
After that.
so if it would need to be changed before December, I don't think we would be ready for those major changes because I'm hoping that the board is still going to have a work session on some charter school conversations that would lead into this year's contracts.
Okay. And then I would suggest that the copy that's attached has the district signature on it also.
Thank you.
Mrs. Julian.
Thank you. This is for Dr. Meinert. On 26, page 26, under Section 8 Transportation, you've talked, and of course there was a conversation around attendance is a critical factor and important, and the lack of transportation and busing is affecting that. I know we don't have a plan in place, but can you speak to that at all?
I can
Hard to
speak
put you
to
on.
that. No, you're not putting me on the spot at all. I can speak to the challenges that we're having with transportation and with schools of choice. You know, they are a charter school, and so parents understand as they enroll in charter schools or schools of choice that their primary means of transportation would be themselves providing those transportation options. If we get to the point in the district where we stabilize the number of routes or we have additional drivers that are available, then we provide those opportunities for schools of choice like we've done for Effie in the past. I will be very transparent and honest. I don't see that happening in the near future, given both the complexities of the financial challenges we have in providing additional routes along with the driver shortages that we have. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. As we increase the number of routes, that also increases the amount we have to pay Durham for those routes. And at the same time, we're quickly expending the transportation fund balance that we have for the school district. And so it becomes this really challenging set of variables as we work through that. Now, as we talk about legislative priorities, one of the legislative priorities should be an increase in transportation subsidies from the state, because then that could, if there are drivers available, help us pay for those services that we need for Effie and other schools of choice within our district.
And I'm going to put myself in the queue real quick. I had a question around the waivers here on page 83. You've got the one for assignment and transfer building administrator. You've got one for selection of instruction materials. You got a couple for that. And yeah, just curious if you could talk about that for a minute.
I mean, I think the intent here is to really try to preserve the autonomy of the APC in executing the mission of the charter. And so that's really kind of casting a fairly wide net on what's acceptable in terms of asking for waivers, and then hoping that we've covered all our bases, even things we hadn't fully anticipated. So I think that's really where that comes from.
Dr. Miner?
So Josh, there's a couple waivers in here that I would have questions about, and without additional information, I would not recommend the board approve a few of these waivers. And so waivers 95.5.4 for student activities, 95.5.41 student activities, and the drug and alcohol disciplinary waiver are all ones I have questions about. So could you walk us through what the intent there is, and I guess how you carry that out at a school level?
I mean, I'll be honest, the 955.4 and 955.41 were in the previous charter application. And so I just slid those over. And I think the most recent example of utilizing those waivers was actually this last spring. Our senior class went to Albuquerque, New Mexico on a senior class trip. Again, like, I think that the intent there is to preserve the autonomy of the school and the APC. I don't think that would make a huge difference if you didn't grant those. So in terms of the alcohol and other drug violations, and Sarah actually messaged me as she was reading through, and this is actually really specific. So because we have such a small staff, I do not have a drug intervention specialist on staff, nor do we have a in-school suspension room. And one of the real challenges, and I was actually one of the big advocates for the change to the current set of consequences around drug and alcohol violations, which currently is 1 day out of school for in-school suspension. But if you're at West Valley or Lathrop or North Pole High, you've got a drug intervention specialist, you've got an in-school suspension room, and that all is basically handled and supervised very effectively that way. We do not have that. And so my answer to Sarah was the proposal that we be allowed only in this one incident. So with this particular violation, that we're allowed to use a 3-day out of school. Just because we don't, like, it really stretches my ability to run the school and teachers' abilities. For a while, we were parking our students in the office of a junior high teacher if they were a high school student for their in-school suspension. And then one time, by some, I don't know, gift of fate, I had 6 people simultaneously, all with a drug violation, and actually the SMART program sent their whoever was currently the person, and we just stuck them in a classroom with them. So that is the intent of that one, is just simply the limitations of our small staff. And Lisa is, you know, she is on it. Like, when you put a drug violation into the system, if you haven't done it exactly by the book, I get a call in 2 minutes. So that's the explanation for that one.
Yeah, follow up, Dr. Minor?
So given there's trade-offs with charters, and you have smaller class sizes, and you make a lot of choices on the budgets for your school or for your school, do you see a time in the future where you might have an interventionist? And I'm thinking, as we look at disciplinary data, just suspending students and then expecting them to come back different without some kind of educational component isn't really an effective way to address drug and alcohol issues. And so if you're seeing kind of large incidents of disciplinary issues, I would encourage you to use your budget differently to have an interventionist or work that within your advisory model or something along those lines, rather than waiving this policy at the district level.
I mean, I think, again, I would have to go back to the APC, and they would guide that decision. I guess it would be very different. There's so many trade-offs, Luke, in terms of where you put your very, very limited resources. What I will say is that, and I hope I don't jinx myself right now, but the incidence of drug violations is trending down for us, and I would say that's kind of proof of concept, and that's a function partly of the emphasis that we place on the school community and on culture and on the Native values and their time spent with elders. That I don't think that we can minimize the impact of that. Obviously, if you deny us that waiver, then we'll have to make do, and sometimes I'll park a kid in my office when they do the in-school suspension. So that's out of my hands. But I guess I would still push for that in terms of just us being able to function as efficiently as possible right now.
Any other follow-up, Dr. Minor?
Not on waivers. I do have another question down the line, but okay. I'll leave it to board members.
Any other board members with questions? Mr. Burgess.
I guess I kind of wanted to circle back around to those test scores. And part of the reason is because I want to give you an opportunity to talk more about hurdles that you're seeing, like what's keeping those test scores low for you. I know that most educators would say that standardized tests are not necessarily the best metric of student performance, right? So I'm wondering if you have any ideas of are there, are there particular boundaries, cultural things that are maybe getting in the way of these test scores, and how do you go about addressing that?
So I think that obviously it is a very, very complicated question, you know. But I would start with a student's previous disengagement with the school system. And so often we work with students who you can look at the data on PowerSchool, or you can just anecdotally sit there and speak with the family, and you realize that the amount of time they were not engaged in school is, and it's been going on for years. And so much of school is developmental and sequential. And so I don't have an immediate fix for that, because we're always going to welcome students no matter what their experience of being in the school system was before they came to us. I think we can drill down once they're with us, and I'm continuously encouraging the staff to think, how can we do this better? What different strategies can we implement? How can we leverage technology and use that? So I would say that the source of the problem is, it's long standing and it goes back years. And I realize we don't have control over that part of it, but we have control over having students start to develop their confidence and become more engaged in school and have their attendance improve, and those things. I guess one of the things that's challenging around standardized test scores is a sense with some families now of that's just not important, and so I think the incidents where I'll work with a student and we'll be talking to them about their just kind of total lack of effort on a standardized test, and it's almost like attitudinal, and so obviously we're trying to address that as well. And then finally, I think it's really important, when we got that question about that significant drop between 2 years with such a small size, it is so heavily impacted by the cohort of students who are currently moving through the system. So it's all of those things. I'm very happy that the district has all of us using map testing twice a year. I feel that we're only going to refine our method of benchmark reading testing students, and then transferring the information that we draw from those benchmark tests to the classroom and starting to develop different approaches with different students. So I probably you didn't get the answer you wanted, but it's a really, you could write a 1,000-page book about that issue.
No, I appreciate it. I think that really helps me understand the scope of the challenges here. I guess, can I follow up?
Yes.
I guess just as hopefully this is a simple follow-up, but do you feel that the test scores reflect your students' actual learning or knowledge?
No. That's
Thank
a
you.
simple no.
Questions from the board? Mr. Dorn?
Two quick observations, and I'm down to my last handful of questions. But one on assessment, just to note, not to debate it, but just to note that the Commissioner of Education has said that less than half the students are expected to be proficient on the statewide tests, and that we have never, as a state, in the last 20 years, looked at student response to the questions. So we don't know how they read it and respond. So really a big issue for cultural responsiveness. The other one is just going back to the waiver piece, an observation that I know my own experience, principal at high school, is sometimes some students an in-school suspension in some circumstances that works really well. Sometimes an out-of-school is more effective, and I think that's something, whether it's in waiver or not, but I think we also have it in our policies where principal has quite a discretion. Question I have is on sustainability. Enrollment has been pretty steady at Effie, generally just under that 150 mark, and not to get bogged down in the amount of funding, but that enrollment picture sustainability for whatever amount of money that generates from the state. Thoughts on that? I know it's nip and tuck.
Well, and I think just kind of to remind everybody, the way the negotiated agreements are written, so if your goal as a school is continuity of staff, we have staff members who've been there for 12, 15 years, and we actually have very little staff turnover. Every single year, every one of those teachers gets more expensive. And so, particularly with no change in funding at the state level, you're working with less and less over time. I will also say that we have the benefit of being in a district facility, and that actually saves us quite a bit of money compared to the other charters. So that's a positive. So I believe from a financial standpoint, it's very sustainable long term.
Okay, and I guess, and part of my question there is in terms of growing that enrollment.
So this is a real this is a real mystery to me. I'll be totally honest. I tell people this all the time. I am getting more and more indications, almost weekly, that we are doing what we're doing better than we ever have before. And I've been there all 20 years that the school's been open. And this is coming from families, this is coming from colleagues in other schools in the district, this is coming from the university. And yet, our enrollment has not spiked up. And we are the only charter school that does not have waiting lists. I'm sorry, we do have waiting lists. We do not have a lottery because of the way that our families come. And I invested significant resources and time into really utilizing social media over the last 18 months to try to tackle this from a different vantage point. I ask myself this question: are there 15 or 20 families in the Fairbanks borough whose kids would thrive at Effie and they don't know about us? Absolutely, absolutely. And it still has been a challenging nut to crack, figuring out how to connect with those families and get the word out. But I would say the other, and I feel like I've said this too many times tonight, but during COVID and post-COVID, one of the, I think we all saw this, was there was a huge migration over to homeschool programs, to Raven and IDEA and Cyberlinks. That clearly, the movement in and out of homeschool programs, and sometimes best, but not always best, from my observation, has increased significantly. And that was a factor we were not thinking about as a charter school at the time that we were presenting to this body with the last charter renewal. I don't think the issue of students in homeschool programs ever came up once. And it's very much an issue now. So.
Ms. Julian?
I have a follow-up question from a budget perspective. Is that $10,794 new expense in fiscal year 24 under communication? Is that what you've invested to get the word out more about Effie?
So actually, no, that is not. we would, so one of the benefits of being a charter is we have a nonprofit associated with the charter school. And so the primary funding was through our nonprofit to do that work. I believe the communications is this, without going into a lot of details, it's this very kind of complicated formula that has to do with the connectivity of schools and the contract between the district and the provider.
Dr. Minor?
Yeah, I'm being told by Miss Beam that that's a E-rate portion of that funding for Effie Kokrine, which provides internet for schools.
Mr. Dorn?
I'd like to build a little bit on Tanya and Travis's comments and conversations we have had related to the family connections. And besides the graduation rate, specifically graduates of Effie, you have students who come in and out over those potential 6 years. And I think we've talked about this, that sometimes they've gone away, gone back to the village, come back. Sometimes the student has taken that initiative to come back and work towards graduation, or they take what they've gotten, the strengths from Effie, back to another school setting. Am I on correct understanding of that? And talk a little bit about.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of flow. That's the best way to say it. I think part of the reason that our school does not operate a lottery system is because of the transient of families moving in and out of rural areas, moving from Anchorage back to Fairbanks, and moving all over. And I think we find that students come back to us quite frequently. Just as an anecdote, we just had a family that had to leave Fairbanks, and the son left and went to visit a grandmother in Florida, experienced 2 hurricanes, and jumped ship and came back to Effie and found a different place to live. And now he's back. So, you know, that's a perfect example of somebody. And then I think the other kind of parallel issue related to that is the, you know, I think everybody hopefully here knows how interrelated the Native community is in Fairbanks and in the interior, and the number of relatives that we have now at the school and people who refer Effie to their relatives, it feels like it's just, you know, growing exponentially.
And I would just suggest a way to weave that into the application. Because it is really, I think, one of the great developments of that community partnership and those connections that are built over time.
Mr. Cole?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of, we are like family. You know, I graduated there 30 years ago, but then, you know, as it's developed, all the stories that I hear, you know, we're, as Native people are so connected, you know, when you talk about things, sometimes the word Effie comes up and they're like, oh, what's going on over there, you know, and we have people like Eliza, Tom Huntington, these different Native elders that come in and work with youth there, you know, Marianne Wheel, Ben Stevens, Donnie Stevens, you know, and so, you know, as a drummer, you know, I'll hear from the other drummers that they're drumming out there, you know, and so we kind of know what's going on in Effie sometimes just because of the activities that they have. And, you know, when we're talking about like the drug issue, you know, sometimes punishing somebody isn't going to do so much, but, you know, the opposite of addiction is connection. And when you create this community at Effie, it's like family, you're connecting, you know. I grew up in a family, a broken family. My mom was a single parent, you know, a lot of alcohol and drugs going through my home. And my safe place was my school at that time. And I believe like Effie sometimes is like that for these young kids that, you know, whatever they're going through in their own life. When they're at Effie, they're safe. They take pride in that school. You know, every kid, like I see my son's buddies, you know, we see them at Fred Meyer's or something, and they're always waving and, you know, giving his others handshakes and hugs and things like that, you know, and it's that community connection that we build in that school that, you know, that, yeah, drug use will start to go down, you know, participation will start going up. I know for a fact that that works because in Alacacat, where I'm from, I taught songs for a year and the grades went up, attendance went up. The vandalism in the whole village stopped. You know, when you give children, youth, something that's theirs and they take pride in it, you know, they suddenly don't feel like somebody's always trying to control them. They've given them that little bit of freedom to, you know, develop it the way they want to, you know, their dance group or their leadership club or their helping. And yeah, those are things that you can't measure, but you can see, you know, like Josh, I know you could probably just feel the differences in the hallway when one week they had some great event going on. And then the whole week following, it's just like the spirits in the hallway is a lot better, more positive, you know. And I've seen a lot of times where when kids are not getting along with one another, somehow they amongst themselves try to talk it out. You know, they work things out in a way of like, hey, they ain't cool, you know. So they're not afraid to really partake in like that discipline thing. You know, sometimes they're trying to keep each other's out of trouble. They're trying to keep each other's motivated. And that's what's the benefit of a small school like that with a lot of Native students. You know, we have like our elders there that help guide us in a way that, you know, we don't try to bring shame to our family and ourselves. So we wind up just improving whatever we're doing. I struggle with reading. You know, I'm dyslexic, but if it wasn't for Howard Luke School, I would have never graduated high school. But it was always that positive, beautiful environment they gave us. And I'm a single parent, so that's why I got here.
Mr. Doran?
And I just have
Two
two
more?
questions, I'm done. But I do want to observe, since I live in the neighborhood, Effie students walk by our house on a regular basis. And we see them in the neighborhood while I'm walking around or my wife. And I just want to say that when you talk about the relationships between them and stuff, they represent Effie very positively. And I know that makes a difference. You hear laughter, you hear good conversation, you know, snippets of it and stuff like this. But it's a pleasure to have them around. Would you talk for a moment about the TCC Go program? And I think, again, elaboration would be helpful in the application because of how you're connecting to that post-secondary experience. Particularly when you say that you're targeting, what are you doing to help those, you say higher at risk? I mean, it's not really the term I want to use, or, you know, the stereotypical kid who's going to college, but you've got a community partnership, which you've done a lot with communities and community groups, but just talk a little bit about that, and I think give a flavor.
Yeah. So TCC Go is a program working with, of all things, the School of Management, which is, you know, up at UAF, and they have two instructors who come down, and the introduction to college level coursework is two intro level courses that essentially are like career exploration courses. And so the model is to really guide and support through a lot of the parts of college coursework that people don't think about that trip students up. Things like registering yourself on UA Online and figuring out how to add and drop classes, and all of these kind of logistical details. So all of that gets supported and guided, and I think that's actually really critical part of it. Um, and so the way we identify students for this is truly myself and the high school math teacher, Mr. Galloway. We basically sit down with the folks from UAF and we just start tossing around names of students that we think, you know, nobody would have ever thought that so and so would try to take a college class. I'm going to pull her aside tomorrow, and I don't want to say this, but I'm basically not going to give her an option. I'm going to say, you're in this class. And we've done that a number of times. And it is a risk, but I'll be honest, it's a risk that has proven to pay off more often than not, which is really, really satisfying to watch. And I think that it's a unique approach to doing that. I've been actually very impressed with the folks from UAF because that's a fairly unconventional way to do this. And they've been super supportive the whole way. And just to play this out, kind of where this can go to give you a sense of it. So in the first year, we had a small cohort. A couple of them are in UAF now, like in their third year, and we knew they were going to go to college. One student in particular struggled significantly through all of high school, actually was receiving all kinds of supports, just barely made it through the TCC Go year. Like it was by the skin of her teeth with a lot of support from different people. We have continued working with this student. So she's 2 years out of Effie now, 3 years out of Effie, completed, became a dental assistant, finished the dental assistant program, applied for a job at Chief Andrew Isaac. None of that would have happened without that TCC Go program, and specifically without us saying, we're gonna push you into this, even though we think that there's actually a fairly high probability you might not make it. And I can think of a handful who are in there this year, students who really school is their safe place, and we are the primary adults supporting them in their lives. And again, it's pretty cool to watch a pretty tough kid turn to their friend out in the hallway and talk, I got to go to my college class right now. Like there's something in that. So we'll definitely expand upon it in the application, and it's just been a exciting thing to see it evolve.
Thank you. And I think you've talked about those types of things, and should be there. You have graduates who come back and share with your students, and you provide post-graduation supports for them. It's that extended family, I think, is a real key piece of Effie. My last question was, and this doesn't need to be answered tonight, but I'm also tickled by the idea of boarding. That came up. I mean, it's like, wow, okay. I know, that's, we'll give credit where credit is due. That's tickles the imagination. But it does go along with also lessons for other schools, that Effie provides a really, really important service of its own for kids. But lessons from that can help students, and especially Alaska Native students, success in our other schools, K-12. So just kind of keeping that, and that may not, that's beyond the application, so probably not tonight's conversation, but something to just put in the hopper.
Any other
Thank you.
questions from the board? Oh. Go on ahead.
Hello, my name's Sitsu Eliza Winfrey. I just want to comment on TCC board. At TCC Go, I had two of my grandkids that I raised. They went to Effie Kokrine. They went through the TCC program. And I want to just tell you about my son, Frank Henry. Frank Henry struggled in school, but he was a very good student. He tried his best, and he did his best. And one day he came home and told me that he was going to a TCC Go program. I had no idea what that was, but I did research and I found out what it was. Today, my grandson graduated from Effie. He graduated with TCC Go College program, and he got a certification in CNA. So he worked at various homes here in Fairbanks, and then got a job at FMH. He worked in the surgery department crew, and he was one of the persons that handed the doctors the instruments. And he was telling me the study he did on it. He said there can be 30 to 40 instruments. So when the doctor's operating, it's like they just name it really fast, so he's got to grab it and give it to the doctor. And he also works over at the surgery department off of Stace Highway. My other grandson works for Doyon in IT, and he's very successful in what he does for Doyon. But I just want to bring those out because that's my grandkids' story. If my grandkids' story, their life, where they came from, the things they went through, I took them, we raised them, and to see where they are today, it really blesses my heart. And that same hope that I had for my grandkids, I look at these kids at Effie. I want that to happen to those students. I'd rather them be successful, maybe even be on a board like this, because I don't want them to get into drugs and alcohol. And that was my main thing when we were raising our boys. We say no drugs, no alcohol, no drugs, no alcohol, and we really pushed it. Today I can say my grandboys are alcohol and drug free. And they stayed that way all through their teenage life. My heart goes out to the students at Effie, and like I said, I want them succeed. I want them go high. I want them to be lawyers, doctors, surgery, anything they can be. That's what I want for our children, my grandchildren. And that's my hope for these kids out there. I call them my grandchildren because I'm at that age now. I'm a grandma. Everywhere I go, people call me grandma. And anytime I hear somebody say grandma, I always turn around because I'm a grandma. I just want to tell that story because it's a successful story. Bessie, thank you.
Thank you for sharing that story. Is there anything else from the board? Not seeing anything? Okay, thank you, Effie Kokrine, for being here tonight. Thank you all for taking the time to come speak with us and share with us your school. And we hope you all have a great night. Board, take a 5-minute recess. forgot. All right, we are back from recess, and I will return this meeting over to the administration.
All right, thank you, President Burnett. Due to time, we did have 3 policies on the work session, but we weren't sure how long the Effie portion would take. And so it's looking like we'll probably, we'll start with general AI policy, and we'll see how long that takes the board to work through. If we have time to move to another policy, we'll do that. If not, that's okay. We can push cell phone and academic integrity to another meeting if we need to. So I'll turn it over to Diana, and she'll walk us through the general AI policy. And then we also have Mr. Shane Beam and Kathleen Edwards with us to answer questions if needed.
Thank you, Dr. Meinert. The general AI policy is a policy that Teaching and Learning had been writing, I think, and researching for a while. So it is a brand new policy, not only to our district, but there is no ASB model policy for it either. It was created by the Teaching and Learning Department here. We also have administrative regulation, just so that you're aware, because the administrative regulation really goes into use guidance for students and staff. So there might be some additional questions that you have as you look through the policy, but the AR is going to address more specific use guidance down to what examples of what could be in the syllabus and stuff like that. As far as the academic integrity, I know we're talking about general AI use policy, but I also just wanted to say the academic integrity policy was revised by Teaching and Learning at the same time, because it really aligns with the AI policy and kind of shows what the AI general use policy in action would look like with the academic integrity policy. So we brought this to the policy committee, since it was a brand new policy, and got feedback from the policy committee, and pretty much they had questions about a lot of great questions that Ms. Edwards was able to respond to about how the district is going to respond to providing for resources to students and staff. And they felt that it was a policy that was ready to go, and the committee loved it and wanted to see it move forward. As far as where it would go from here, it could go into the Article 6, which I think we're hopeful could be finalized by January, potentially, just to throw out a timeline. But
Yeah, I mean, I think it was our hope if the board work sessioned any of these policies that they would come forward as standalone policies. Given the unknowns of Article 6, we don't want these to get held up. If we could, if the board was supportive of these policies moving forward, and we did that within a time frame that we could implement second semester, then we would do so. If not, then we would be looking at an implementation at the beginning of next school year. All 3 of the policies in tonight's work sessions are tough ones that would be implemented mid-semester. So it would be a natural break at winter break if we wanted to do this for second semester. But if it needs more work, then we'd be looking at the beginning of next year for implementation.
That would bring a question for me. Is it the administration's hope that we would implement this for the next semester, for after break?
It is our hope, yeah, that we would be able to implement both the AI and cell phone policies in the second semester. Specifically the AI, we know it's already there. Students and teachers and administrators are already actively using it, and this is something that both our students and teachers have been asking for more guidance on.
Mr. Beam?
I would say not only is it already out there for us, of course it's already out there across the nation, and there are actually lawsuits out there already of when a student uses AI, gets caught, gets punished, but there's no policy on it, and then there's a lawsuit because there's no policy. So I would say the sooner the better. If we can get it up and running for second semester, that would be ideal. Otherwise, we're kind of leaving ourselves open for the next 6 months, and we really can't do anything about it without this policy.
Questions from the board? Mr. Dorn.
I guess a generic question in terms of it's trying to define AI, but it seems to me that it's, in terms of technology, we already have coverage. This is a specific type of technology app. How far off base am I? You're more techies.
I would say that this is where that blend of the AI policy and the academic integrity policy meld very nicely together, and that we don't have anything specific to AI in academic integrity right now, both in terms of students and staff. It's a new enough technology and unique enough that I'm not confident that we have policy that covers AI in general. And so I think this does a nice job of covering some of those gaps that we currently have in our policy manual.
Mr. Dorn?
Okay, and again, I have some specifics, questions about these, but I think in a general piece on that or approach is, as we look at AI, and especially as you mentioned, it's a relatively new, although arguably it has been around for decades, and we've used it. But in terms of how this generating material is a newer version of it, keeping the policy very brief and looking where we can put things into AR, so that we've got a policy that gives the guidance, but that we spend really time on the AR and put things there that, you know, as we learn pros and cons of it and this type of thing, we can keep up to date more easily than having to go back to change policy. So that's a lens that I'm trying to look at.
Dr. Merritt?
Yeah, and I think that's what we were trying to accomplish with the policy at hand. It's much more brief than the AR is, but if we need to even pare it down more, we're definitely open to suggestions and conversations around that.
Mrs. Julian?
Thank you. I'm really glad to see that we're looking at this. I think that from a legal perspective, it's very important that we cover this and also implement sooner than later, because I've used AI in my work for some time now, and I can see very clearly how a student might not necessarily even know that they're using AI just by searching Bing. Bing is all now AI. So I want to, I guess, encourage that this policy goes under regular review, because the world of AI is changing so rapidly, and the legal implications around it, as well as citations and how you cite AI. We also just learned that, you know, there's instances where they might cite something that they got on AI and it's actually a placeholder. It's not a real source. So it's, I'm glad that we're doing this. I looked through the policy and I don't have any specific questions, but I do ask that this become a topic that we review pretty regularly as this field grows.
Mrs. Hardy?
Similar to what Mr. Doran said, and I spoke with Dr. Meinert before the meeting, the idea that it did seem really brief and that it would be mostly covered, like the meat of it, in an AR. I know I would feel more comfortable seeing the AR. I know we don't approve them, but so that it's all there. And when we do approve it, we can have that peace of mind that it's been covered. And then I had a few general questions, but again, some of those might be addressed in AR versus the policy itself.
Go ahead, Ms. Hardy.
So this one is to the policy, but also could just be in AR, where you have the purpose, and it kind of goes through Staff productivity mitigates the risks, challenges, responsibilities in terms of ethical use, data privacy, security, integrity of academic work. Should it also add in something about copyright violations or legality issues as far as a thing that needs to be concerned, especially if you're using like Dolly to create a children's book, which people have done, and how you cite those things, or there's a lot of murky ethical legal issues in AI.
Dr. Minor, Mr. Beam?
I would say some of that, as far as copyright, would be covered elsewhere. Yeah, so I think that we'd be okay there. As far as kind of putting all three of these comments together, I would agree is that we do need to be able to review it from time to time. I think that's what the AR would handle for us. I think that this policy as is generic enough to point us in the right direction, and then the AR would certainly follow with the details to put it together. I'm not positive that we need to review the policy every year, because the AR would handle that part of it.
Go ahead, Dr. Minor.
And just comment on seeing the AR, we can get that out to the board this evening. And like Ms. Hardy said, no.
No, actually, we focused on the board policy. We are not ready to do anything with AR yet.
We're not quite ready, but we do have a draft of it. So I'll let you know when we can share that with you. But as you said, the board does not approve that, but we are welcome to the feedback once we have a draft that's ready to share with you. So.
Do you have a follow-up, Ms. Hardy?
I had a few other things to maybe say, please say this could be in AR, and I don't know if it would be better, like the policy as it is right now, then I think is fine, as long as we have an AR that shows that we're backing it up. Do you want us to email those to you? Would you like me to read them? It's up to you guys.
Go ahead, Dr. Minor.
You could, how long is the list that you've got?
4 things.
Oh, go ahead, read it.
Okay. Tools like Grammarly that utilize AI, or like was mentioned, Bing, are those allowed? Do they need express approval? Even Google Mail now has AI. So specific guidelines for teachers to be able to, like, a student would want to know, do I need to cite I use Grammarly in my writing? In which case, everything I write ever would need to say assisted by Grammarly, because it's on my phone, it's on my everything. And I know, like, certain colleges, kids have been expelled for using Grammarly. That it should include AI literacy, as far as being able to spot deep fakes, being able to identify what is and isn't AI, and that being a part of our AI, AR. There's a lot of things there. And I think the last one was, are we going to add cross-references to the end of the policy?
And I'm going to throw myself into the queue real quick. Along the lines of things in the AR and such, the definition and the policy, I like it there, but I would like that in the AR too. Make sure that for the artificial intelligence, just make sure that the definition of it is in both places. Mr. Doran, I did see your hand up. Did you have a question?
If you're ready for.
Yes, sir.
On policy. I do find it confusing why we have 3 purposes. It seems that they should be a single purpose. Some of it is redundant, but it adds confusion.
So just to make sure that I understand what you're looking at, so we have the purpose up top, right, which is our general definition, but then you're also seeing under general principles, purpose is listed again. Is that
And
kind of what
in the
we're-
middle, we have purpose/goals.
Sure. So it might be helpful for the board to know that this particular policy is based on the AI Guidance for Schools Toolkit, which is a document that was created by a number of different instructional technology and technology for education committees or groups. So it's a document that was created by ISTE, which is the International Society of Technology and Education, COSIN, Consortium for School Networking, UNESCO, PACE, CDT. So there are a lot of education-specific organizations that came together, and those 7 principles are actually taken from that document. So it may be that we potentially then would need to just switch the term that we use to provide additional clearance or clarity around that, but those principles really are taken from kind of this nationwide document at the moment.
Go ahead, Mr. Dorn.
Okay, I have another comment about principles. I don't really have a problem with having principles listed out. I think that can be a good thing. But if we're talking about purpose for having, aside from the principle, we still have 2 purposes, and it reflects the committee that they couldn't come down, so we'll take everything. And so I think and there's some redundancy in the 2 that are outside the general principles that I think is adds confusion to somebody reading. You look at the purpose and then, when we look at the purpose and then, so.
Yeah, I appreciate that feedback. I think we can take that and work to meld those together to make it more brief and succinct and understandable. So thank you.
You have another one, Mr. Dorn?
Okay, then when we do get down to general principles and we have the 3rd purpose, that sentence needs to be fixed to be Grammarly would take it apart. AI to help all students. I mean, we need to, it helps them or it does or whatever. The thing that it struck me as I was reading through those principles, and maybe for the policy, is just give the additions of, as an example, A, or maybe there should be an A and B on each of those, becomes confusing. For instance, on number 2, compliance, it's adherence to existing policy, which covers more than data. The example only talks about student data, but there's further compliance beyond student data. I mean, there's compliance actually with academic integrity. There's compliance with, a lot of the things that we would put in, but these are kind of general statements about AI, and I think, again, they add a lot that become distractors. Number 5, integrity. A, we throw in a sentence at the end, don't outsource thinking to an AI system or fund or tool. Why, these are judgment statements type of things. I think they can be better dressed in AR, but also it should be more about AI, not other judgment statements. I mean, this is what we want to have happen rather than negatives. So that's a piece that I, in general, in formatting, bring it together, more succinct policy, more in AR, so that when it's reviewed and things changed, it's easier to do.
Can I ask?
Yep, Dr. Minor.
So clarifying question on that. Is your recommendation to keep the principles and kind of the statement after that, but get rid of the sections underneath it for all of those?
Generally, yes. Yes, you can convince me otherwise.
Yeah,
and
that's
and
fine.
maybe,
We can take a look at that.
I was looking at that, maybe that sentence right, or the idea of a sentence right after the bold-faced principle, maybe it does need to capture a little bit of that, but breaking it out into all those subsections, I think, is really muddling the water. Well, that's a good word. We'll keep it.
I got it. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go to Mrs. Julian.
Thank you. The only issue that I have with the policy is that it requires explicit approval. And the other policy that we're looking at tonight that parallels this also talks about explicit approval prior to that student using it. And I think that we're beyond that as a society, that AI is so integrated into everything that they may not even know that they're using AI. And I feel like I just want to know, is there a reason why legally we have that in there, and is there room to get to a place where this policy recognizes that AI is being used widespread by everyone, and our students are most likely using it and not necessarily getting explicit approval, but leaning in towards, this is what AI is, this is how students need to use it, this is how our educators need to use it by way of a policy?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I'll take a stab at it, and then I'm sure Mr. Beam and Ms. Edwards might have some additional information. And I think the explicit approval would definitely be lined out in AR, what that looks like. And I do think leaving explicit approval for content generation and like what a final product would be is really important, and require some kind of citation if you are using it. And maybe in the AR differentiating between, using it for all of these things that are just kind of built into platforms now versus using a platform to generate the entire thing, are like two separate things. So figuring out how to thread that needle in the AR will be important, but I do think having some kind of explicit approval is an important part for students. And then direction towards staff too. So staff being very intentional about, there's going to be times where we want students to use AI tools to help them be more efficient with their work. So in this, assignment, you're allowed to use XYZ, and putting really tight guardrails around it so that students learn how to use these tools effectively, but they're getting that like permission or approval as they're working through that.
Yes, I would agree. When we were talking about AR in previous conversations, our team, one of the thoughts is that we know sometimes teachers will be okay with kids using AI and sometimes they won't be, and then that has to be made clear to the students about when they can use it. And while it is quite possible that kids are using AI and not realizing it, just like the rest of us, I think what was just spoken is very clear in the idea that some kids will be using it to create content and turn it in as their own, and that's what we're looking at handling. It's not the idea of, I'm using some other platform to do something else, and that uses AI. It's I'm going to use AI to write this paper for me, and that's a different scenario. Now, sometimes teachers will say, with this assignment, you're allowed to use AI in this circumstance and in this way, and you have to cite it, and that's what will be laid out in AR.
Follow up, Mrs. Julian?
Yeah, and so I want to, Mrs. Brandy, or Mrs. Hardy, sorry, mentioned the student expulsion for using Grammarly, and I'm familiar with that as well. The way that the policy is written then now, it does state that student use of AI within the district requires explicit approval, period. And that, to me, is interpreted very severely. And so I'd like to see a little bit more definition, because I think there's a difference between generating content to present as your own versus using AI.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Dorn? Mrs. Hardy? No, Mr. Dorn.
Okay, and this may be my own ignorance about AI, but I think it's also developing. There was a work session, a whole work day last year or the year before ASB about AI, which was excellent. There's a sectional at the ASB conference coming up, so I'll continue to learn. But on number 4, balance, last sentence, and this again would be probably more in AR than here, but for my information, it talks about AI may not be used as a primary source of information. I immediately went to secondary source, tertiary, or it should be considered any source of information, partially because AI is such a broad term. And there's AI that runs formulas for you. You know, it's been around since World War II. There's AI that writes for you. And if we're talking about something that's writing something for you, it's more of a search engine. From what I understand of the AI, it's primarily a search engine that is bringing things together. So it's not a source of information. And so it's a learning curve for me, but to understand where we're going with that.
Yeah, Mr. Beam.
I would say, and please correct me but I've heard our tech coaches talk about AI several different times, and they would say it's not a search engine. It should not be used as a search engine at all. Search engines are search engines, and that's Google and that kind of thing. AI is, I don't know how to explain it other than it can take your 4, 5, 6 sentences and figure out what words you've used and use a mathematical calculation to figure out what words are similar and rewrite your whole thing into 4 or 5 paragraphs and make it sound amazing.
Mm-hmm. So I saw Mr. Burgess first and then Miss Carol Hubbard.
It will synthesize the information as opposed to just searching and scraping. It then puts it together into a new format or a new idea that can be right or wrong, partially truthful and not truthful. And that's what we would call a hallucination, actually, within the AI.
Mr. Burgess?
Yeah, I was just gonna basically say that same thing. Like it starts out doing what we would do with a search engine by seeking out all the information on the internet, but then it has these other steps to it that that can be severe pitfalls by that with that synthesis of the information. So I was just I didn't really need to say that because it's been said, but I just yep, that's it.
Miss Carol Hubbard?
I was just going to expand on what Mr. Beam said. My brother actually used AI. He downloaded a program, and he was creating a sales presentation, and so he fed it some parameters, some basic data, and then he said he basically hit the go button, and this thing created an entire sales presentation for him. And he said to the thing he typed in, he said, not so technical, enter. And it redid the whole thing. And he didn't like that either. And he said, so he morphed it again. And he said a little bit of whatever. I don't remember what his words were. And it was about the third or fourth one that he liked the best. And he used it. And he sent it to me. He said, check this out. And it was amazing. But it will absolutely, it will write the paper for you. And it will change the wording however you want to change it. Matter of fact, I was just playing on Google a couple nights ago, and I was asking questions. And it said AI response, and it was answering me questions. So it is also becoming a search engine. It's becoming like it's giving me answers. And I was kind of testing it a little bit, and it was a little creepy, but it was very cool too. So anyway.
Mr. Dorn and then Mrs. Julian.
Just on that
and
one, and
Mrs.
I'll go
Hardy.
to my other comment is very interestingly, and I don't want to debate it, except it's very interesting that you've all used search. And it's not creating its own thing. It is searching from a bank. So I still have a concern about it ever being a primary source of information. I was also wondering about D under integrity, that it contains AI generated content, whether it's an original piece of work or contains. So we, my question there is the student or the staff member is responsible for it. They put their word in. State Board of Education is responsible for their AI mistake recently. But would we accept AI generated content? I do think there needs, the openness that I want to see is that, and why I say the AR is really important is so that this is going to change and we're learning things. So I want to keep that. And I think we need to give versatility to staff, teachers to use it responsibly. But I'm hoping that this is making a real distinction. It is not an original piece of work. It's copied from somewhere.
Dr. Minert, anything? Saw you grab your mic, sorry.
Yeah, I was wondering what the question would be. I think it's a bit semantics. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's if we're talking to D specifically, it's saying you're responsible for whatever that end product is. Now, do I care if a student or a staff uses ChatGPT to help them with that end product? No, I don't, if that's making their work more efficient. But if it's a student, they need to have permission and parameters around using that. If it's a staff, they're using it effectively, and if there's research involved that they're going outside of AI, they've already done the research, they're writing the piece, and they're using AI to craft it and make it better, not to create the original piece of work. And so I think that's the real distinction. And especially as students, as we're thinking about it, like, we want students to create. You shouldn't just have the machine create it for you. You should be creating the content and then having AI help make it better on the other end. I don't know if that answered your question specifically to D.
Gives me something to ponder.
Okay.
And then Mrs. Hardy had her hand up before Mrs. Julian, so go ahead, Mrs. Hardy.
It was just when we're talking about AI, and I spend a lot of my time on AI. I was an early adopter. We were sitting in this boardroom like 2 days after ChatGPT came out, and I had it write me a letter to advocate to legislators about school funding, and that was 3 years ago. So I'm an early adopter. And AI doesn't just search and comb things from the internet. You have a large language model that's like ChatGPT. You also have completely other AI that will solve mathematical problems for you that has been trained on a completely different data set. You can create your own AI, ChatGPT. You can give it things you've written and then say, this is your data training, write like me. As Ms. Hubbard, or Carol Hubbard said, you can have it create entire presentations. And at one point, or at some point in the future, there will be people whose entire job will be prompting AI and knowing how to efficiently and effectively prompt an AI to be able to create things, including code, including presentations and writing. It is a 21st century skill that we have to be teaching our students. I play around with it almost every night with my kids. We'll ask Copilot, which is a Microsoft version of AI, random questions. We'll see if we can trip it up. I asked it a question yesterday to do a math problem for me, and it got it wrong. And I was like, hey, that's wrong, and it'll correct itself. The point is to teach our students how to be intelligent consumers and users of this. It's not going away any more than we used to say you need to memorize your multiplication facts because you'll never have a calculator on you at all times. I carry a calculator with me every moment of my day, and I don't even have to type it. I can just say, hey, whatever, solve this problem for me, and it does it. We have to be keeping up with the pace of technology, and unfortunately is a law in technology that it halves, like every year it gets faster and faster and faster. So we have to keep up, and we have to be preparing our students for the world they're going to enter in just 3 years, which will be AI driven. It's not going to go away.
Mrs. Julian.
Thank you, and I agree with what Ms. Hardy just talked about, and I feel like you do address it in point 3, subpoint A, which is, schools should integrate AI education into the classroom to equip students with critical thinking skills, and I feel like the policy as it's written captures that. I just, and I know that I've already talked about it. The requires explicit approval. I'd like us to move more towards how we are going to be using AI and how we're going to be preparing our kids, and I do that really well under the general principles. From a school district professional development training perspective, though, is there a plan, Dr. Meinert, to integrate professional development for our educators so that they are so that they're able to achieve the things that we're asking them in this policy?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've already started work on that plan for the last 2 years. I believe we've had a fair amount of sessions on AI in the classroom during our professional development days. So it's something that we're already providing professional development on, and we'll continue to do that in our, we have some really skilled coaches that have a great understanding of this and how to use it in the classroom, and have been helping teachers implement this, the different tools and technologies in district and services.
And along with the instructional technology coaches, our secondary librarians have been stepping up to the plate as well and giving on-site professional development to school faculties.
And then is that, follow-up question, is that for K through 12, or are you focusing on, any specific grades?
The professional development has been K-12. I'm not sure the librarians, if that's mainly high school or?
Secondary, so 6 through 12 at the high school and middle school library level. But we have been offering, as instructional technology team, where we've been offering a Google Classroom that during first quarter anyone could hop into with the staff. It's also online on our website as well. If you wanted to see the slide decks, those are available, and we're planning a second quarter as well. So we're trying to hit them both with live sessions during district-wide in-service, little 30-minute kind of once a week sessions, and then asynchronous opportunities as well.
Any other questions from the board? Okay, time is 8:30. With that, should we move our other 2 policies to the next work session? Okay, so we will take the academic integrity and cell phone policy over to our next work session. Mr. Dorn?
Just a question on timeline.
Mhm.
If we want this for second semester, it means it needs to go to first reading in November, 12th and 19th, and second reading in December meeting. So question, would it be worth taking a few minutes on the integrity, because to get any feedback, so that we've got that? I think the other one, I would agree, let's put that off, because I think there are bigger issues with that, right? And I don't know that that's as timely a need.
Dr. Meinert?
That's certainly fine if the board's willing to work on additional policies this evening, and specifically academic integrity. We'd love to hear feedback from the board.
What would the board like to do? Go ahead, Ms. Julian.
Do you need a motion?
No.
I'm
willing to.
I would like to talk about the academic integrity because it is so closely tied to this one.
Okay, we can go ahead and do that.
Diana, can you give a general overview of the academic integrity, and then we'll open it up for questions and comments?
Yes. Our current academic integrity policy is called academic dishonesty. And it's a pretty short policy that mostly just speaks to not cheating. Again, this was rewritten along with the general AI policy to kind of show how general AI use would be implemented. In looking at this policy, it does kind of go into some consequence language, but that's mainly just to ensure that that if you're investigating an academic integrity issue involving AI, that you have to be very careful with what you find because you might not get information that's accurate. But to be clear, any specific consequences on how a school would respond to academic dishonesty would be in the administrative regulation.
Questions from the board? Mr. Dorn.
I do want to say that I love on page 2, the B, plagiarism. I think that's an extremely important one. So as I ask questions, point out a good thing. That's right there. General question that I had about AI, and I put this really in number 2, expectations for use and limitations. Is there a distinction in AI about the word generation or the generation of words versus references? I'm getting both things. It's throwing in references, in examples we've seen. It's giving a reference, may or may not be accurate, but giving a reference to something which is different than word generation. Is that something we need to have on our horizons with this, or make some distinction?
I mean, I think the distinction is clarified in plagiarism, in that if you're looking for references or you're doing research, you need to cite or have proper citations, which you should not be relying on AI at this time to be providing proper citations. There's other tools and other ways to go out and do proper research, and AI isn't that at this point in time.
Follow up, Mr. Dorn?
I would suggest just then keeping that in mind as maybe AR is written, because I think that may have caused some description or confusion among some people.
Any other questions? Mr. Dorn?
Okay, under consequences or violations, that first paragraph will be determined on a case-by-case basis. Will there be guidelines in the AR?
I imagine there would be. Do we have any details right now on what kind of that guidance would be? No? Okay.
Mrs. Julian?
I have another implication question. In the final part under consequences of violations, or second to final section, it says, while AI detection tools may offer initial indications, do we need to support our educators more in those AI detection tools and supporting them so that they have the tools necessary to be able to identify AI-generated content that somebody might be using that would fall under that plagiarism?
I think it's a good question, and I'm going to answer with my initial knowledge about it and then pass it over to Kathleen. But in my understanding right now, the AI detection tools there aren't widely accepted or great AI detection tools out there anymore that work, that we would recommend for teachers to use. The ones that are marketed out to schools and universities have proven to not be effective and discriminatory in nature. And so, we wouldn't recommend those at this time. But Kathleen, is there any additional information to that?
We just know that even a lot of the AI creators have even said their own detection tools that they have made do not work. So if a teacher is using a detection tool, we would just, again, recommend that it is simply one data point. It is not the do-all, be-all. It would potentially give you a flag that you would then want to have a conversation with that student, right? I mean, that's ultimately what we would want any detection tool to do, would be to prompt a teacher to have a conversation to find out and make sure that the teacher really understands what the student has learned, what they have submitted. But we would not recommend a tool at this point to do that.
And then I think going back to your earlier question about professional development with teachers, there's certainly times where I can tell that content is completely AI generated. And so as we're working with teachers, looking for cues and different things that you might look for to see if it's AI generated versus, you know, their own language that they would use. And a lot of that is age appropriateness, right? Like depending on the vocabulary a student is using every day versus what is now in this paper that they turned in.
Mr. Burgess.
So on that, sorry, on that same sentence, last part of consequences of violations, I'm not clear on what initial indications or what the indications are about. I just think that sentence could be fleshed out a little bit better for clarity, because I think that the intent is to talk about, you know, indications that AI was used to generate content or something. But when we're mixing it in with, I mean, this policy isn't entirely about AI, it's just had AI stuff added. So I just want it to be more clear, specifically what we're looking for indications of. And then the other thing is not related to AI, if I may. I know of one incident, at least one incident, where a student that I know was accused by one of their teachers of cheating, of academic dishonesty. And if it had not been for that student's parent asking questions and advocating for that student, they would have been penalized for something that they actually did not do. So I'm just kind of wondering where we see the safeguards for that sort of overzealous, you know, kind of, you know, when there's suspicion of cheating or academic dishonesty. How is that vetted, and where can we build in those kind of protections?
Dr. Bynum? Yeah.
I don't have an initial response to that, but it's something that we can take back and consider and look at in the AR, you know, in terms of individual situations. You know, if a student or a family or a parent disagrees with, you know, a teacher's determination on plagiarism, they can always seek guidance and assistance through their assistant principal or principal and those matters. And so that would be kind of the next line of a quick remedy. But let me think on your suggestion on guardrails around, you know, what you've talked about and how we might illustrate that in an administrative regulation.
Mrs. Hardy.
Kind of along the same veins, and even in the example you gave, the parents could then go, that's assuming that that student has parents that have the ability to advocate for them, and so that's placing the onus on a support system that might not exist. And it would be nice to see something in AR that has some checks and balances where maybe the teacher isn't the one making the call. Like they can say it, but let's check it by, especially when you have AI, it can be really tricky. And I was a judge for an Ed Rising competition last year, and me and the other judge were pretty darn confident that the student's speech had been written by AI. But even we weren't totally sure, and it took talking to that student. And like, I would like us not to be as punitive in a lot of these things and more in the let's use these as learning opportunities and addressing some of those issues. And there are times when I know even for myself, if I handwrite things, the words I choose to handwrite are very different than the words that I can spell when I type. And I have been accused in my life of cheating. But it's because I have tools and resources and I am able to show other things in different ways when I have those tools and resources. And if I didn't have parents who advocate at that time to be like, no, it's because there's word processing and there's these things, we're placing a lot of onus on the support system that doesn't always exist. Sorry.
I think I saw Miss Carol. Oh, yeah, sorry, Dr. Minot, go ahead.
Reply back to that. So I said students and families, so I think they both have the options and opportunities, and I understand that all students have that available to them, but that is a possible remedy. I do want to say, I think in general, we have amazing educators that do know how to work with students on an individual basis and aren't punitive in nature. And so I don't want this conversation or us to draft administrative regulation around one or two unfortunate examples where it didn't go right, because in general, our educators do an excellent job and have done an excellent job over decades, right? While AI is new, plagiarism is not new, and the way that teachers have handled it in the past, they're very familiar with that. And so I just want to be conscious around the conversation that we don't draft AR around a couple unfortunate situations, because I do think in general our teachers do a nice job working through that.
Miss Carol Hubbard and then Mr. Burgess.
Well, I agree with Luke about, I actually was going to say something kind of similar to that, about the teachers though, that they have a skill set. I mean, if you're a high school English teacher, you've got a process. And if a child doesn't have a home network, then maybe the teachers hold on to your rough draft and all the processes that you go through when you're writing a paper. I mean, that shows the progress and the progression of your thoughts and the changes that you're doing. And I mean, there's lots of ways to prove how somebody gets from A to Z. So I like that we have to trust the teachers too, to be able to flesh that out. And I think I just want to rely on that a little bit too.
Mr. Burgess.
I can appreciate this discussion and that perspective, Dr. Minor. And I don't, I do expect that incidents like this are fairly rare, but they're potentially also the kind of thing that could completely change a student's attitude about school, and affect their learning and their desire to be at school or with a certain teacher, or their performance at school in general, or their feelings about themselves. So it is something that I think that it's worth building in some guardrails there, and it probably does belong in AR. I want to point out, and again, I don't want to write policy based on specific incidents, because that's not how we should do it. But I also have this experience. So the example that I was thinking of, there was an appeal to the principal, and the principal, at first was just like, oh, I trust my teacher. But then once the parent pushed a little harder, it became pretty clear to the principal too that no, the teacher was out of line. But a lot of pushing had to happen to get there. So if we have, better guardrails built in, and I think also a part of this is communicating to students and parents or students and families what their rights really are. So just wanted to throw that out there, because I do think it is very important that students be able to advocate for themselves, and that families can advocate for them as well. But sometimes students don't know how to do that, and they don't have other people to advocate for them. And one incident like this can completely shift a student's perspective, and therefore the educational outcome of that student.
Mr. Dorn?
As I've been looking at this, this policy we're looking at right, is academic integrity. I think updating it as an expectations for students in 2 and 3, referencing AI, because it is a point of great conversation and growing conversation, needs to be there. I would suggest taking out that expectations for AI use out of this policy because it distracts from academic integrity and shifts the focus just to AI. But where I see that section, expectations for AI use, is in the general AI policy, 6161.3. And I would suggest that would be a very appropriate place, replacing the general principles, which are the principles of why you should have a policy rather than something we need in policy. But those expectations do help provide that guidance on AI policy, and it's very appropriate in that section and not distracting from academic integrity, which covers a much broader area that we've updated it to make sure that people understand AI is involved with it. And that would be then the follow through on that with consequences of violations. That second paragraph, I would again just delete it because it's specific to AI. The first paragraph talks about an investigation which covers things including AI. So
Mrs. Julian.
I agree with Mr. Dorn to an extent. I think it's important that we put expectations for AI use in here as a category. I do believe that right now it's duplicative, the way that it's written. However, I feel like it's important that we state it because a lot of people might not necessarily even associate AI use with academic integrity or the implications of plagiarism because it's so integrated. So I feel like we maybe even just that first section there, the point number one, with a reference to the general AI policy, pointing to more specific usage of it, is appropriate. Again, number 2 gets a little bit duplicative. Thank you.
Mr. Burgess?
Yeah, I support Mr. Doran's idea to move this section with that similar caveat. I don't know that we need a whole subheading for on expectations for AI use. It could potentially be number 4 in the list of expectations for students and be shorter, and then this can be, we can have a cross-reference to the AI policy. This can be moved there. Also, I think someone brought it up earlier, but AI is not defined in this policy yet. So, and it's important, especially here, because academic integrity is also AI. So.
Mrs. Hardy?
I'll just say I'm in support too of moving a chunk of that academic, or not, now you've got me saying it, Bob. The AI policy to that actual AI policy and cleaning this up to cover more general academic integrity.
Anything else from the board? Okay. Well, with that being said, we will go ahead and move the cell phone policy over to our next work session with the first readings for these coming up at our next meeting on the 19th. Would that be when that works out? Yeah? Okay, seeing a yes from administration. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Kathleen Edwards, Mr. Beam. Anybody have any board comments or anything? No, with that, I will take a motion to adjourn. Or we are adjourned. That's right. We're in a work session. Work session, just call it.
I'm so glad you said that about